Hello, my name is Dawn Hendricks. I'm the Early Childhood Special Education Coordinator for the Virginia Department of Education. And today I'm going to be talking about early childhood special education. So what I'm going to be covering in this webinar, I'm going to talk first about the differences between early intervention and early childhood special education. I would encourage you, if you have not already watched it, to watch a webinar recorded by Sarah Moore with the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services on early intervention. That will also add more information and increase your knowledge about what early intervention is and help you to better understand the differences between early intervention and early childhood special education. But I'm certainly going to do my best to help you understand that today as well. I'm also going to be talking about early childhood special education regulations and procedures. What is the referral to early childhood special education process and the eligibility process? Those are really important components. And then finally, I'm going to be talking about the individualized education program. So first, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about early intervention, just some quick basics on early intervention. So early intervention is also called Part C. And I know as a parent, that sounds, as a professional too, that sounds really weird to call something Part C. But it's called Part C because it's Part C of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. I'm going to refer to my program, Early Childhood Special Education, sometimes as Part B because it's Part B of IDEA. So just so you know where those terms come from and why we call it Early Intervention Part C and why we call it ECSE Part B. But let's start with early intervention. This is a program that's ran through a different state agency than we are ran. It is ran through the Department of Behavioral Health and Disability Services. How it works is that there are 40 local systems that are called infant and toddler connections that run early intervention across the entire state. And early intervention is provided regardless of a family's ability to pay. So there's different ways that that payment can take place. Sarah can talk more about that in her webinar, but you can see some examples here, such as insurance, the Children's Health Insurance Program, Medicaid, etc., are all ways that early intervention can be paid for. Now, with early childhood special education, it is ran through the Virginia Department of Education. It is structured very differently than early intervention. It is ran through our local education agencies, our school divisions. It is ran through our school divisions. It is free, no matter what. It is free. It's a required service. It's part of the regulations that is federally mandated across our state. And special education and related services, which I'm going to define both of those later on, are provided as part of a continuum. And I'll talk a little bit about that continuum as we get there as well. So early intervention. It serves children from birth through age 2 inclusive. When a child turns age 3, he or she is no longer age eligible for early intervention. This is an important component of that program. Anytime a child is in early intervention, they will be transitioning out because this is time limited based on age. Now, with early childhood special education in the state of Virginia, it can begin at age 2 and goes up through age 5. Now, age 2, if that child turns 2 before September 30th. So let me explain that. If you have a 2-year-old child, that child turns 2 October 15th, he or she unfortunately has met the cutoff for early childhood special education. So then what we would be looking at is the child's 3rd birthday. So basically, when we look at early childhood special education for age eligibility, we look at if that child is age 2 by September 30th of the school year or by that child's 3rd birthday is we want to have that child evaluated and into early childhood special education. Another quick note on this slide is you see here that it goes up through age 5. Now that's only for early childhood special education. Special education goes up through age 22. So if a child is found eligible for special education, the family determines that they want that child to stay on beyond the age of 18, that can happen. So special education is a service that continues on after early childhood special education for children who are found eligible. The early intervention eligibility is listed on this slide. It's very different than what you will find regarding eligibility for early childhood special education. And it's really important to remember that if you have a child who's in early intervention and may move to early childhood special education. So for early intervention, the eligibility can include a developmental delay of at least 25% delay in one area, some sort of atypical development, such as sensory, motor, social, emotional, behavioral, social, language, or that child can have a diagnosed condition that meets eligibility criteria. So, for example, if the child is born prematurely, or if the child has a genetic disorder, those are automatic eligibility conditions for early intervention. And then you can see on the far right side of the screen, delays in development may occur in the areas of speech language, motor and physical, emotional and social, cognitive, hearing, vision, and or health. So when I mentioned first, at least 25% delay in one area, in any one of those areas would be an eligibility criteria for a child to get early intervention services. Now, if you recall on a previous slide, I mentioned the age eligibility for each program. To get into Part B, or early childhood special education, again, the child has to turn 2 by September 30th, or again, we're looking at the child's 3rd birthday. Now, you might notice that there's some overlap. If a child is age 2, it's really up to the parent to determine, would you like for your child to stay in early intervention, or would you like your child to be referred to early childhood special education? Again, it's really up to you, the parent, to determine where you would like for your child to be served during that time, if he or she should be eligible for services. So that's our brief overview of early intervention. So now I'm going to move into early childhood special education. So I want to start by defining the terms. When we talk about special education, we talk about special education and related services. If you see this written into the federal law, if you see this written into our state regulations, you will see special education and related services. So what do these terms mean? So special education means specially designed instruction at no cost to the parents to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability, including instruction conducted in a classroom, in the home, in hospitals, in institutions, and other settings, and also includes instruction in physical education. So basically, the key terms here: specially designed instruction. That child needs some sort of special techniques and strategies to learn and to access what we call the general curriculum, the curriculum that every child should learn. As I mentioned, it's no cost to the parents, and it's set up to really address those individualized needs. We will use the word individualized a lot because that's really how special education is designed to be done, is designed to meet the individual needs. If there is a child who is diagnosed with autism and has autism, we might set up a program that addresses communication, social behavior. Perhaps there's some academic need there as well. If a child who maybe has a speech language impairment and has an articulation disorder, that individualization is going to focus on that articulation disorder. So that's really key to this. The other piece is it's conducted in a classroom, in the home, hospitals, institutions. So special education can occur basically anywhere. It can occur in communities. It can be anywhere. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. So this term related services that you always see in conjunction with special education is basically those services that a child needs to succeed with the special education. So it's not enough sometimes just to have the instruction, but what other sort of services might assist that child with a disability to benefit from the special education? I always think the easiest way to define this is to give examples. So that can include, for example, speech language pathology. In order to benefit from the school-based services and educational services, speech language might be necessary. Auditory services, an interpreter might be necessary for a child who's deaf or hard of hearing. Physical therapy might be helpful, occupational therapy, transportation to and from school. All of these are examples of related services. So anytime we identify special education, we're also going to be looking at, are there any related services that will help that child to benefit from special education? So I mentioned on the previous slide that special education can take place anywhere. One of the key things to note about special education is that it is a service. It is not a place. I know it is very easy to think about special education as a classroom, maybe down the hall from the kindergarten classrooms or down the hall from those other preschool classrooms. It's where children who have disabilities go. That is not special education. It's about services that we identify for a child who needs them. So to go back to the child I was talking about on the previous slide who may have autism and have a lot of need, we might have services in speech. We might have services in occupational therapy to help that child with some of his or her sensory needs. We may have services that are educationally based to help that child to learn some of those basic learning skills. So those are the sort of services that we would identify, and then we would determine where are those services going to be delivered. Are they going to be delivered in a Virginia Preschool Initiative preschool classroom? Are they going to be delivered in a child care setting? Are they going to be delivered in the home environment? Are they going to be delivered in a special education classroom? Those are all things that we would need to decide, or maybe it's a mixture of all of those settings or some of those settings. But it's really key to remember that special education is a service, not a place. This is often a misconception that we have. So I want to now move into the special education process. There are 5 steps, and we're going to talk about some of these lumped together because they really work in unison. The first step is identification and referral. So when a child is suspected of having a disability, a referral is made. This is a written or an oral request for an evaluation. So if you, for example, had a concern about your child's development and your child is turning 2, your child is 3 years of age, your child is 4 years of age, even if your child is 9 years of age, you would contact your local school division and say to them, I have a concern about my child's development. I believe he or she may have a disability and needs an evaluation. That's a referral, contacting your school division and letting them know you have a concern and would like an evaluation. The second step is an evaluation. So this is where the school team would evaluate the child to determine whether there is indeed a disability and whether or not that disability has an educational impact. I'm going to talk about that educational impact a little bit more in a few slides. Step 3 is the determination of eligibility. So once the evaluation is completed, with that evaluation, there might be observations and assessments completed. Then a team, including you, will get together and look at the results of the evaluation and decide, does the child indeed have a disability? And does the child warrant special education and related services? If the answer to that is yes, then we move on to the next step, which is development of an individualized education program or an IEP. This is an individualized plan for the child that outlines the special education services the child will receive. And then finally, the last step is reevaluation. At least every 3 years, a team is to reevaluate the child to determine whether he or she continues to be eligible for special ed. So let's jump into some of these in a little more detail. So we're going to start first with the identification and referral, as well as the eligibility processes. So I'm going to lump these together in the next couple of slides and talk about that beginning step of identification and referral on through eligibility. So the first thing for you to know is that a referral for special education and related services may be made by anyone. The most common people to make a referral would be the parent or guardian. We've already talked about early intervention. Early intervention will likely make referrals to the school division for children who continue to need services once that child ages out of early intervention. A teacher may make a referral. So let's say that a child is in preschool out in the community and that teacher has some concerns about the child's development. They may make a referral. Now, that should be done in unison with the parents and with the parents' permission, but that may happen. A doctor may make a referral, a grandparent. And we also have mandatory school screenings that are done. The federal law requires us to do screenings in things like speech, vision, hearing. And these school screenings are designed to identify children who indeed might have delays or disabilities. And so a school screening might be another way that we see referrals coming in. A referral may be made in writing, in person, or by phone. So you could send an email to your school division. You could stop by the school division that's in your neighborhood and talk to the school principal or administrator there. You can call. These are all ways those can be done. And when a referral is made, there's a designated administrator at every site that is the person who's to collect special education referrals. And that designated administrator, when they receive the referrals, they can look at that referral and say, there's enough information here for me to think that we should do an evaluation. And so if that's the case, they move that referral on to an evaluation. They may look at that and say, I need a school-based team to look at this referral, and we're going to determine if there's enough information here to do an evaluation. This is a very common step. I don't know the percentage of referrals that this happens with, but many, if not most. This happens that once the referral is received, a school-based team looks at that referral, reviews the information, talks to the parents, and then we'll make a decision whether or not to move on with the evaluation. And then the third thing that can happen is that the evaluation is denied. That is a possibility that there's simply not enough data to support evidence of a disability. And if that's the case, the school division will give you notice of that and we'll talk to you. It should not just be an out and out referral, but should be something where they're gathering more information from you and talking to you about the reasons for their decision, if that, again, was to happen. So eligibility for special education. As I mentioned earlier, our eligibility criteria for early childhood special education and for special education in general is very different than the eligibility criteria for early intervention. So the first criteria that has to be met is the child has a disability. That seems like, okay, we know that. That's what special ed is all about. But these other two criteria must be met as well. There's an adverse educational impact. Let me give you an example. Perhaps there is a child who has spina bifida and uses a wheelchair to navigate, and that child is 3 years of age. However, that child does not have any delays or any sort of adverse impact other than the navigation of his or her environment. The child can learn, the child's speech is developing along age, developmentally appropriate standards and guidelines. Then for that child, there might not be an adverse educational impact. The child may not then indeed need special education services. And so part 3 of this that goes hand in hand with that is that there's a need for specially designed instruction. This doesn't mean more instruction. This doesn't mean tutoring. This means special strategies to help that child learn. So all 3 of these have to be met. So that's what's being looked for in an eligibility process. And with that process, there are different disability categories that we are looking for. And so I'm going to put these on the screen one by one so you can take a look at them. I'm not going to read them to you, but you can see what they are. There's 13 in total. And you can find on our Virginia Department of Education website definitions for each of these. What will happen is during the evaluation process, if there is any concern that a child might have one of these disabling conditions, then the nature of the evaluations will be tailored towards that disabling condition. So for example, if the team suspects a child might have autism, they might do evaluations specific to autism to determine if that child has autism. So here are our 13 disability categories under which a child may be found eligible for special education and related services. And so through this, I've talked about the evaluation process a lot. During the evaluation process, a child is tested by qualified personnel. So there's likely a school psychologist involved. There's special education teachers. There might be a general education teacher. There likely will be a speech language pathologist. There might be occupational therapists, physical therapists. So qualified personnel are doing evaluations. And they might be looking at things, they will be looking at things like vision and hearing. They will definitely be testing those areas when a child is referred. But they're also going to be looking at things like social and emotional status, general intelligence, academic performance. And for young children, academics is looking at what is functional for young children. What should they be learning in the context of their 2-year-old life and the 3-year-old life? We're not looking to see, can they read? We're not looking to see, do they know their letters? We're looking more at functional skills and play skills at this point in their lives. We're also looking at motor abilities, adaptive behavior, and communication status. So these are all things that can be evaluated during that process. During that process, one of the evaluation procedures will also be observations. They will be observing the child, and we certainly want those observations to take place in the natural environment. We do not want those observations taking place in something stark, that's unnatural for the child, but instead maybe out in the community, at a playground, in the home, so that the evaluators can really get a sense of what the child is able to do and where there might be needs in that natural environment for that child. During that process, you might be interviewed and will certainly be a part of that evaluation process. So once the evaluation process is completed, then we move on to the eligibility determination. Now, it's important to note it takes 65 business days to complete the evaluation process and to get to the eligibility determination. By law, that's how long the team has to do an eligibility. So once that referral is made and that administrator receives that referral, that team has 65 business days then to get to this step where the eligibility is determined. During the eligibility determination, there's a meeting. You, the parents, are part of that meeting. So the school-based team, of which you're a part of, gets together, reviews the data, reviews the reports, and looks to see if there's enough evidence to proceed. And so if there is, then the team determines that there's enough information for that child to receive special education and related services. Now, at this point, we're not determining what those services are, but we are saying, yes, this child indeed has a disability. If there's a clear disability, such as autism, hearing impairment, vision impairment, traumatic brain injury, we're going to label that disability. Some children might be found eligible under developmental delay because we know that there's a delay, but we're not quite sure what the disabling condition is. And then we're going to move on to the next step of the process, which is the IEP. So real quickly with this process, there is an eligibility team. I mentioned on the previous slide that parents are a part of the team. You are a core part of the team. So please don't ever forget that it might be intimidating. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It can be intimidating. I've been a part of many of these eligibility team meetings, and you are a part of that team, and you need to be verbal, speak up, talk about your child, and just help to make this decision regarding eligibility for your child. Another note here, Part C, your early intervention case manager or specialist may be invited should you want that person invited. That's done with parent permission. But this team also includes teachers, both general education and special education, administrators, and specialists who know how to interpret evaluation results. So that's typically a school psychologist. And then, of course, others might be invited as needed, such as a speech language pathologist. So that's the process. That's the process we have from referral to evaluation up through eligibility determination. Those are the steps. And again, that takes 65 business days. Now, if that child is found eligible, the next step is developing an individualized education program. This is the step where we are identifying what sort of services and supports that child needs. For an IEP to be developed, the team has 30 calendar days to complete it. 30 calendar days. There's an IEP team. That IEP team is made up mostly of the same people that were on the eligibility team. Parents, again, being a core component of the team. You're going to be there talking about your child. You're going to be there talking about your hopes and dreams for your child, what goals you would like to see implemented, what his or her needs are in the home. You're going to be talking about those sorts of things so that that can inform what sort of goals you identify and put on the IEP, and then what sort of services might be put into the IEP. Again, Part C may be invited should you want Part C to be there. I already mentioned that it's written within 30 calendar days of the eligibility meeting, and one of the core components of an IEP is something called least restrictive environment, or LRE is how you will see this abbreviated. The LRE is looking at when we determine placement, where are these services going to be implemented for the child? We want to consider the least restrictive environment for the child. Where can we serve this child that is most like what other children his or her age would receive? That's the least restrictive environment, and that's what we want to consider first. So the purpose of the IEP, it's a document designed to meet the child's unique needs. I mentioned earlier this word individualized. The IEP, individualized education program, is just that. It's going to meet that child's unique needs, and it's going to do so by having information with the following components. First, we're going to start with the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. So we're going to describe what are the child's strengths, what are her needs. That's all going to be based on the evaluation that was just completed. It's going to be based on any information you, the parent, provides. Any observations that were done, all of that can inform this present level of performance. We're then going to move to measurable annual goals. What sort of goals do we want the child to achieve during the course of the year? What sort of accommodations might need to be put in place or modifications in order to help that child? So ultimately, we want the child to access the general curriculum. We want that child to access whatever curriculum the other preschool age children would access, what other 3-year-olds are learning, what other 4-year-olds are learning. And if we think that the child is unable to do that, we might provide some accommodations to help him. For example, for a child that might get distracted easily, the accommodation might be sitting the child closer to the teacher. For a child who has sensory issues, the accommodation might be like a little sensory seat to sit on that provides some feedback for the child. Modifications, on the other hand, is how do we modify the curriculum so that child can successfully learn it? We might add in additional instructional strategies. We might slow down the pace of that curriculum. Those are modifications. We've talked a lot about special education services and related services, but to give you examples once again, what sort of educational services are required for the child to be successful? Does the child need 5 hours of educational services a day in order to meet the goals written into the IEP? For another child, it might be an hour a week of educational services for that child to learn the goals written into the IEP. So those are going to be individualized. And then we talked earlier about related services. Does the child need 30 minutes of speech a week? Does the child need no speech? Is OT mandated? What sort of transportation does the child need? So all of these related services are going to be written into the IEP as well. And then finally, with placement, I mentioned on the previous slide, least restrictive environment. With placement, we are really going to look at where is that child going to be receiving those services. So perhaps for one child, that child is going to be in a Virginia Preschool Initiative preschool classroom. So this is a classroom for children who are typically developing. and receive his educational services there and his speech services there. For another child, that child might be in a special education classroom for the majority of the day. For another child, that child might receive speech only. So this is going to be individualized as well. But that's going to be a core component of that IEP. And then finally, our last step of the process is reevaluation. Reevaluation is where we do exactly that. Every 3 years, it is mandated federally and through our state regulations that we are going to get back together and reevaluate the child to determine, does that child still meet special education criteria? Now, our goal is for that child to move out of special education, right? We don't necessarily want the child to remain there forever, but if that's what's needed, if that's what that child needs to learn the general curriculum, then that's what we will provide. This, again, the reevaluation process is designed to be individualized. If that child continues to need services, we will go through the eligibility process again, determine eligibility, write another IEP, and move forward with this process every 3 years. But there are some children, indeed, who move out of special education that we find that the special education services have been incredibly successful, that child is doing well, and that services are no longer needed. That reevaluation process is just like the initial evaluation, where there's 65 business days, there's different evaluation components, and of course, parental involvement is a very key component of the reevaluation process. So that's it. That is our process. That is what early childhood special education consists of. I do encourage you to, if you have a child who's moving into early childhood special education, to talk to the administrators there, to talk to the teachers there, and to learn about what that looks like in the context of that school division. There are some nuanced differences from school division to school division. And you can reach out to me anytime. My name is Dawn Hendricks. Once again, you see my email here on the screen. So I look forward to hearing from you and wish you the best. Thank you.